Hello everyone, my name is Iago Mota and this is the second video of the year. Look at how competent I am already. Second video. It's what? Just second semester? So this video is going to be the second installment of the Doing Random Stuff series, and today I'm going to create this explosion that you're seeing right now on the screen. So without any further ado, let me just explain what's going on over here. I'm just going to tell you that I'm not starting from scratch. That's because the process of creating an emitter, for me at least, takes quite a lot of trial and effort. There are times, in fact, where I spend the whole day just trying 5 different emitter setups, none of them really working, so the next day I gotta try again only to give up because it's just way too complicated. Some of these emitter setups really are no joke. Some of them are quite elaborate, so this one, thankfully, only needed to be pretty simple. And really all that's going on here, let me just explain really quickly. This object over here has a particle system. So as you can see over here, the normal and random velocities are being animated from high values over here to essentially 0. So what that does is, say the random velocity, it basically causes the particles to move in well, as it suggests, random directions, which induces this sort of thick area down over here at the bottom. However, it thins out when it gets closer to the end because the random velocity is decreasing. The normal velocity, since I'm not using any faces or edges in this particular model, the normal velocity is essentially pushing the particles away from the center point, which is pretty convenient considering they are scaling up from the center point as well. So it creates this illusion that the particles are following the vertices, following the same movement that the vertices had over here in the beginning. They die out pretty quickly, but you can sort of see what's going on. Down here in the bottom, I just wanted to create this this interesting shape. I didn't want it to end abruptly at a tiny point, so that's why I added these particles down over here. Just create almost like a shockwave, but nothing that expands any further. So that's essentially what's going on over here. So this results in the smoke simulation that we have right now. So anyway, you saw what we had in the end. What I'm thinking of right now is adding some extra movement to this whole simulation, because right now it's rather boring. There's not really much going on. Not that that's necessarily unrealistic. We can certainly make this look at least somewhat realistic as far as Blender can do it. But I just feel like we can add some more movement to make it a bit more interesting for this particular scene. Also, if you have something that doesn't move for very long, like a lot of this is very static, it can tend to become very turbulent, almost as if you increased vorticity up to 4, or maybe an even higher value if that was even possible in Blender. It's just not going to look very good. It's going to look overly turbulent, which is why I want to add a bit more movement to it. So I'm just going to hide the domain over here, just so we can concentrate on the emitter. It's not like the simulation has a shape that's very far off from this, so we can so I can focus on exclusively what's going on over here in the emitter, while I'll add another emitter. And this one is going to be a mesh. So I'm just going to add a mesh emitter. I'm just going to add a, let's see, icosphere, maybe. And let's add a bit of a displacement modifier to it to make it look less even and add some irregularities to it. Okay, so this is basically what I added. It's a really simple thing. I turned the texture coordinates to global just so that we can have some variation in the shape as this guy will be animated. So we're going to do just that. I'm going to animate this. And hopefully we're going to end up with something that looks at least half decent. I'm just going to animate this right now. So I'm going to have it move from the origin point up and scaling up also from 0 to the size that it is right now. That's just to induce some movement on the fire that we're going to have later on. That's about it. I'm not scaling it to 0 either. I'm just gonna leave it like that. So yeah, that's interesting. This might be a little bit of a tricky part. You can see it's expanding quite rapidly this way, so that might induce a few problems later on in this simulation, but let's not judge it too early. So let me just turn it into an emitter. Fire and smoke. And I'm just going to turn the smoke over here to blue. Just so, just for the sake of previewing reasons, because we're not going to render this anytime soon, I'm going to turn that to blue so that we can differentiate between this smoke and the smoke that we have from the particles. Flame rate. Oh yeah, there's definitely something that I want to change. Let's turn the surface to 2, volume to 1, so it emits from the volume as well. Add some keyframes over here, and then turn this to 0, just to prevent the just to prevent it from continuing emitting smoke and fire. Okay. By the way, I apologize for the noise that you're hearing over there. It's I'm sitting right next to my computer, so it's going to be really loud. The background noise is going to be insufferable in this video, so I apologize for that. There's quite a lot hindering the quality of this video. I'm going to have to tell you that, but at least it's not like a top 10 worst YouTube videos or anything like that. It's probably top 11. So, moving on, I'm just gonna check how this looks like. I'm gonna quickly bake it, and yeah, I'll be right back. Okay, so, right. Well, I did want some extra movement, didn't I? This, there's quite clearly quite a lot going on. Now I do like the fact that these tendrils that we had early on from the particles, they're being pushed up by the smoke that this guy emits. So that I think is pretty cool. Another thing that I didn't notice, that I should have noticed earlier, are the settings over here, the flame settings. I'm gonna have to change them soon enough. The smoke color as well. I want it to be blue in this, just for the sake of previewing reasons as well. I'm going to change it to black when we get to shading. But right now I want to be able to differentiate between the smoke that the fire emits and the smoke that these tendrils emit. And I'm considering the smoke that the second emitter emits. Sorry, I'm considering this smoke that this icosphere emitter emits as well as fire smoke. So this over here looks quite unappealing, especially due to the fact that we don't really see much detail going on over here, and that's once again due to Blender just not adding a lot of detail to things that are moving fast. The faster a smoke simulation is moving in Blender, the less details it has. So if I add a turbulence force field, it's going to affect this. It's going to have cause this to split up and cause these large plumes to have some extra detail. But it's going to make these tendrils go absolutely nuts because they aren't moving. They'll be much easily be influenced by the turbulence force field, and that means we're gonna have to slow things down a bit. Well, a lot. So I'm just gonna go over here. Instead of reducing the temperature, I'm just going to reduce how the temperature itself affects the velocity of the smoke. So I'm going to reduce that by half. And let's see. I'm just going to turn both of them to 2. I'm not sure if that's even necessary, but I like to do that. Vorticity, I'm going to turn that up to 2. Fire always looks a lot more turbulent than smoke, so I'm going to have that at 2. Unfortunately, it won't really do much because Blender, once again, fire moves a lot faster than smoke in Blender, so it's not going to acquire a lot of detail. Turn this smoke... I'm just going to turn it to 5. Maybe less. Let's just go with 4. So the fire emits a certain amount of smoke as well. So now let's just take a look at how this behaves in the simulation. Alright, so it's clearly a lot slower. This might actually be pretty interesting. This might... Yeah, I think We can do something with this, that's for sure. Let's see how it goes. So, the movement here looks quite appealing, though I would say that it's a bit insufficient. It's just moving upwards. Nothing really interesting is going on. So, I'm just going to move this horizontally to induce some horizontal movement in the fire. Since we have initial velocity over here enabled, which is something that I almost by default as an instinct enable it, so maybe I didn't talk about that. I'm sorry if I didn't. But since the initial velocity is enabled over there, it's going to, whatever movement this emitter has, it's going to force the flames to have that same movement as well, at least to some degree. So I'm just going to move it a little bit sideways to induce some of that horizontal movement, make it look a bit more interesting. So the particles, they already have some temperature, some positive temperature. I'm going to increase this to about 1, just so that it moves upwards at a bit of a faster rate as well, and perhaps increase this to 0.17, just to have a bit more movement going on here. Let's see how this looks. Well, of course, I'm sorry. Excuse my my lack of intelligence. Yeah, that actually looks quite interesting. Though, it's still a little, you know, it's still lacking. It's still lacking. Let me just isolate everything here. Let me just isolate the simulation itself. And yeah, the fire just seems to be coming from this extension that that was caused by the displacement map on the icosphere. Now I do like this this almost marble-like effect that we have going on in the smoke, as it's not entirely mixing with the other colored smoke. It's moving it around inside it very interestingly. I really like that. I think that's fantastic. That's going to really give us some very interesting looking results in the end. So that's pretty good. I also think this fire isn't really lasting for a very substantial period of time, so we might have to change that. Or maybe this is just an initial blast, and I'm just going to leave it the way it is. What I do want to change, however, is this the general behavior of the smoke once again. But that's why I'm not really increasing the resolution, because I want to make sure that this general behavior that's going on over here, I want to make sure that that's fine, that looks good, that there's nothing terribly wrong with it. So one thing that I really want to do is sort of force some negative pressure to occur. And although we see a little bit of that effect over here, as some of this smoke, as this little cloud over here that you can see is getting pulled up, almost getting pulled up by these hotter areas over here, I still think that's pretty insufficient. In real life, if you have let's say an explosion and it's really hot, its density is very low compared to the rest of the atmosphere, that fire will rise quite quickly and it will leave an area of low pressure, which will cause air from around it to move in back towards it. And this sort of negative pressure tends to really influence the shape of the smoke. It can really cause a streaky almost effect when the smoke around it gets pulled in by this area of low pressure caused by the fact that the fire that used to be there, the low density air that used to be there, left that area. So what I'm going to do to attempt to replicate this effect... Hold on, there's something going on over here. So, yeah, it almost looks like there really isn't much movement going on over here, is there? So it's causing this a lot of turbulence to occur at this location. Let's see if the force field that we're going to add is going to solve this issue. So, actually, no, that I think I see the problem. So we have this explosion really rapidly occurring over here, and it's not really doing much work to expand this whole thing. It's not pushing a lot of this smoke away. That's interesting. I might be able to solve that by adding a particle system later on. Anyway, let's just let's add the force field already. Our first force field in the whole scene. So let's just do that. I'm going to add a force field, and add some fall off. I'm going to set it to 1. 1 is a complete hunch, by the way. I'm not entirely sure how much it's affecting the smoke around it. I'm just making sure that it's not going to affect absolutely everything at the same intensity, because I don't want that. I want its area of influence to be mainly this area over here. I want it to sort of pull this dust kicked up over here in the bottom. I want it to pull that up, so that's about all I want for it. And it's going to influence the shape of these plumes as well, so that's why I'm kind of eager to add it. I want to see what exactly it does. So I'm going to animate it. I'm going to create a location keyframe over there. And let's say frame 15 is when it starts to really affect things. Add another location keyframe over there. Let's see if the movement is good. It's okay. I might want to scale it up over here a bit more. Yeah, okay, that looks a lot better. So, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna animate the strength of this setup. So I'm gonna, let's say, move it to -15. That seems like a lot. But when we're going to increase the resolution of the smoke with the current movement that's going on, it's going to make sense to have a pretty high value. In fact, we're going to add some turbulence force fields later on, and I'm pretty sure some of them are going to have to go. Some of them we're going to have to increase the strength all the way up to like 30 or something along those lines, just so that their effect will be visible in the smoke simulation. I would like to emphasize as well that there shouldn't really be much of a rule as to how much you should be allowed to increase the strength of any force field. If it looks good, it is good. If you need to increase the strength of the force field to a few thousand, which has happened to me a few times, then do it. If that makes it look better, then that's alright. You shouldn't have much reservations as to how much you can change a parameter in Blender and still have it look decent. So, okay, I'm just gonna bake this, and we're gonna see how much the. Actually, I'm gonna hide this force field. Actually, I'm gonna create a new collection for it. Sorry. So this is a collection within a collection over there, and yeah, I'm doing that just for the sake of organization, and I'm gonna hit E on that to exclude it from everything, so that means that it's not going to influence anything. And oh yeah, I deleted the simulation over here, didn't I? So I'm gonna bake this. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to bake one version with the force field, and I'm going to render out that animation in the viewport animation, the GLSL, I think that's what it's called, and we're going to compare the results between each of them. So we're going to see how much the force field that we just added actually influences the scene. So I don't want to trust a placebo in this case and think everything is fine, and that the force field is doing a great job when it actually isn't. I want to know what exactly it's doing. So let's do some real scientific stuff, really complex 50. I'm gonna say hide. Hold on, camera exclusively. Actually, I'm gonna move the cam. Whoops. Clearly, this simulation. How big is the domain? Hold on. The domain is first. Wait a second. What did I do over here? I didn't add any resolution. Oh, okay. So the domain is unnecessarily big, isn't it? No. It's actually fine. Never mind. Ignore that little bit of stupidity that you just experienced there. I know it's a little insufferable, but I rendered that. Now we're gonna take a look at. Now we're gonna bake it with the force field. So I'm gonna hit Alt E to undo the exclusion that we did earlier. Let's just bake it and see how much it influences. Maybe we might even be able to see its influence without comparing the results. The good news is that we don't have to increase the strength to insane levels. The reason why that's good news is because later on we're going to add turbulence force fields, and as I implied already, if you have smoke that's moving very quickly, or that's being strongly influenced by forces, be they force fields or the upward velocity of a fire, it's going to be a lot more difficult to change that velocity to adapt to what a force field is saying, be it a turbulence force field, a wind, force, whatever. So that's why it's good news. In this case, I'm going to just reduce it to -10 and probably increase the power over here, which will make it influence only the smaller areas over here. It's going to have a lesser influence on the tendrils that we had previously. Let's bake it again, see how much change just occurred. It's clearly having an influence on the tendrils again. And I think, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to increase the strength to -15, let's say. Well, that's a lot. And I'm going to just increase the power to 2. So hopefully that will have a very strong influence near it, but pretty much no influence at all in the tendrils. Because I don't want them to become turbulent or lose their shape, because I like the way they look already. Alright, so I'm going to just isolate this once again, create a new directory over here, and I'm going to now render this, and we're going to compare these two animations that we rendered. Okay, so the force field that we added is quite clearly having an effect. Well, not so clearly, but it's certainly something that can be observed, and I like it. I like how much it influences things. I don't want to change anything about it. It's perfect, it's lovely, it's great. However, there is a bit of a problem, and well, it's not exactly a problem, but I do want this simulation to slow down towards the end. I want it to sort of feel like it's done, it's concluded. And it might not be perfectly realistic, but at least it's a way of ending the animation and actually making things feel like that's the end. So one thing that I might do is increase the length of this, let's say to 70 frames. So we're going to have an extra 10 frames to work with, and then I'm going to influence the timescale option over here to slow it down as the simulation progresses. So let's just delete the bake. I'm going to turn the end to 70 frames. To the end of the animation as well. 70 frames. Pretty cool. And I'm going to go over here to frame 50, add a keyframe to the timescale option, and go over here to 70, turn it to 0.7, so it slows down slowly towards the end. Another thing that this simulation also needs is some turbulence to have a bit of distortion happening on these upper plumes over here. However, as I said previously, I'm thinking of adding a bit of a particle system around here at the start, just to force some extra movement to occur there, because not much is happening, and we might want to change that. However, I'm getting the feeling that that problem might either disappear or get worse if we increase the resolution. So I think it's time for us to increase the resolution because of that. You know what? I'm actually going to delete these keyframes. No, never mind. I'm going to move this one to frame 60. We're going to move it back to frame 50. However, I just added a marker over there just to remind myself of that. But so the reason I moved it to frame 60 is because I want to increase the resolution and compare the result of that simulation to the previous result that we acquired, to see what exactly needs to be changed, what exactly the increase of resolution meant for the whole simulation. So I'm going to increase it quite substantially to, let's say, 90. So I increased it by 14 divisions, which might not seem like a lot. Usually, I used to increase it by doubling it, so I went from 64 to 128, and from that to 256. So, and that was quite a huge leap, and the problem with that is you can't really keep up with each problem that appears as you increase the simulation, the divisions. Oftentimes, if I do that, if I increase it from, say, 64 to 128, it's going to look like a completely different simulation, and it's going to be very difficult to keep up with everything that's changing in it as the resolution increases. So That's why I'm changing it incrementally like so. Let's just bake it already. Just examine it like this. I think I have spotted several problems right now. The first one being the fact that this part over here is awfully turbulent. I think, I'm just going to change what I think might be contributing to that effect. I think the particles are getting way too thin towards this area, and I also animated the particle size over here in the emitter settings to emphasize this triangular shape that each tendril has. However, I think this might be a little too small, so I'm just going to increase it to 1 and add a keyframe over there just to keep it from getting too turbulent. Of course, it has the inherent problem of being essentially still, completely without movement, because the particles aren't moving closer to the end over here. So we're gonna have to change that. I think it can be easily changed by adding a large turbulence force field and creating some general sort of larger movements around here. So I think that might work. Let's see. The color of the smoke is still fantastic. It still has that marbly pattern that I think is fantastic. I think that's great. I don't want to change that at all. Perhaps we might later on change a few areas of it, but I don't really feel like doing any of that now. So really, I'm not noticing a lot else going on. Oh, hold on, there's something going on over here. There's this little cloud that doesn't seem to have a very realistic movement. Okay, so it's caused by that. I don't know, maybe that might be solved. Maybe that might solve itself when we add the turbulence forces. Besides, it's not exactly visible from the camera, but I do want to make sure that everything is as accurate as it can possibly be. Okay, so before I examine the result, I'm just going to make sure that I'm not going to forget about this. So I'm going to delete that marker, and set the end once again to 70, and move this keyframe to frame 50. So it really removed a lot of how the fire pushes the tendrils and the smoke around it, and it also made everything sort of shrink, made the tendrils shrink a little bit, and it made them a bit thinner, especially towards the end over here, when you can see definitely tell the difference. It also has these weird extrusions occurring on its own that I think that I'm not entirely sure what exactly causes them. I'm going to ignore them for now because I haven't seen those issues. I suppose they might solve themselves later on as we mess around with further settings, but I'm going to keep them in mind as I'm going to make some changes right now. Firstly, I'm going to increase the number of particles and perhaps increase the size of the... You know what? I'm going to add the second emitter already, because the fire itself, the fire emitter, it's not really having a very strong influence on the tendrils, so we can probably solve that problem by adding an emitter that constantly pushes the smoke away from itself. Okay, so firstly, I'm just going to increase the number of particles. I'm just going to double it already, because we're going to keep increasing the resolution in the future. I'm not going to increase the base divisions to a very high value. I don't think there's much of a need to. I really want to make sure that most of the detail comes from the wavelet noise that we're going to add later on. So, I'm gonna have to enable this quite soon, just to see how exactly this smoke will be affected by this wavelet noise. So as I said in a previous video of mine, sometimes adding this wavelet noise and enabling smoke high resolution, it might actually change the way the smoke looks in the end. It might what usually happens is it almost expands the smoke simulation, almost creates a bubble around the previous smoke simulation that you had, and that bubble is the one that has all the high resolution details. And that can eventually cause the loss of some of the middle scale details that are super important in every smoke simulation. And that's something that we need to make sure to counteract if we see that effect soon. But right now, what I'm gonna do, I doubled the amount of particles as I said, and what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna add a second emitter. Let's go ahead and do that. Another icosphere, let's say. This one's going to be static. This one is not going to be moving at all, so, well, perhaps it might move. So what I'm trying to do with this emitter is create a particle system of slowly expanding particles and use the initial velocity of that emitter to my advantage and cause the movement of the whole smoke simulation, or at least everything that these particles that the particles influence to move away from it because of the initial velocity that I enabled. So that is the plan. Let's see if it works out. Well, it works out in some simulations, so hopefully this is one of them. I'm going to add a displacement map over there. Clouds. And change this size over here to something that's a bit more reasonable. Okay, so this might work. I guess I need to scale it down a bit more. I want to make sure that it's almost completely submerged in the rest of this simulation. So yeah, what I'm going to do right now is add the particle simulation. I'm actually going to animate this first. Okay, so the animation here seems to be a little fast, but the particles are going to have their own velocity, so they're not going to be at all influenced by the velocity of this. The reason I just added the displace modifier is so that we can emit particles from different areas as well. And hold on, that's a little unfortunate. I'm gonna move this. Over here. Okay, that's a lot nicer. So now it's emitting more particles towards this area, which is, I think, the area that really needs that attention. So, yeah. We're gonna have this guy emitting some of those particles and sort of pushing this away. And then let's just do that. Let's just add some particles. Of course, they're not going to be influenced by gravity, so we can just go down over here to field weights, disable gravity. I'm gonna disable all as well. I don't want it to be influenced by... Actually, hold on. I might just increase this over here and have it only be influenced by the force field. So everything else to 0. Force. Actually, I'm going to reduce the influence of the force field. Because it has the strength of 15, it's going to have an insanely strong influence on the movement of the particles. It might not have that much of an influence on the smoke, which that's usually the case for force fields. They don't influence smoke that much, but when it comes to particles, the influence just it's excessively visible. So it's going to have normal velocity. In fact, actually, I'm just going to isolate it as an object right now, and just go over here to its viewport display options and turn it to bounds, just so that the object itself won't prevent us from seeing all the particles. And I'm just gonna, just for viewport's sake, right now it's just emitting from the surface of the object. I don't really want that. I would find it a bit more appealing if we emitted it from the volume. So there. Yeah, we should just start at frame 12 and at frame 18, so let's just do that. And that really changed the whole simulation, didn't it? Right, so that's a little better. Oh, since the size is at 0 over here, then we're going to have some problems, aren't we? I'm just going to move this... Alright. That's a little better. That's interesting, but the particles seem to almost have a square-like movement here. They don't... Since we're emitting them from the volume, they don't seem to be dictated by a particular normal, so they're just moving away from the center, the origin over here, and they seem to be moving in a very geometrical pattern, which isn't exactly what I want, so I'll just reduce this to, say, 0.4, and increase the random velocity to, say, 0.6. So that causes a better expansion. So yeah, that causes them to sort of expand nicely like so. I think 1000 particles is about enough, and I'm just going to decrease the lifetime of each particle to about 20 frames, add a bit of randomness because why not, and I guess that's about enough. Probably increase this to, I don't know, maybe 30. Yeah, that might do. Let's increase this to 1. Okay, that's insane. Yeah, perhaps 30 is just far too much. I'm just going to turn it back down to 20. Okay. well, this might do. I hope I'm not going to be disappointed later on. But but yeah, I think this might do pretty well. Let's unhide the smoke. Yeah, so it seems to be all these particles, well, at least most of them, seem to stay within the bounds of the volume of the smoke simulation. I don't want them to start lingering around and moving away from the whole smoke over there. I just want them I just want it to have some influence on the velocity of the smoke on the tendrils over here, just to push things out a bit more. And that's all I want for them. Right now, I'm just gonna... Oh, I forgot. About one of the most important parts over here. I'm gonna have to give this guy a smoke modifier. So just turn this to flow. Smoke. I don't want it to have much of a temperature difference over here. And particle system, particle settings, initial velocity, and with particles, I don't know if this is a bug or not, but with particles, when you turn on initial velocity and leave it at 1, the velocity is just, it's absolutely insane. The whole smoke simulation goes crazy. So I usually just turn this way down to 0.1, and hopefully that works a lot better. I don't really know if it's a bug or if it's supposed to happen because you have multiple particles. The velocity of the smoke that each of them emit might add up to each other and sort of force that to happen. And I think I know what's going on over here. I'm gonna do this. Probably do some... Nah, that's not gonna work. So what I notice... What seems to be causing this little extrusion to occur over here, these strange tendrils that we did not add, I think I can attribute them to the irregularity of this object over here. So I might be able to actually decrease this and save the simulation, I guess. So I'm going to increase the size of it though, and move it around over there. Okay, so I'm just going to add a keyframe to account for all the changes that I just did. Okay, so it looks like these extrusions that we talked about a little bit earlier, it looks like they still persist. Hold on, let me just zoom up to one of them. This one over here, for example. So to me, it seems like it's nothing but a smoke plume that doesn't really know when to stop moving. So it probably means that it's not encountering a resistant force, which to me means that it's not really an issue, because later on we're going to add some turbulence force fields, and they're going to act as essentially some resistant forces for it. So it's not. It seems to be a problem that's going to solve itself later on when we just ignore it and focus on other things. One thing that I don't like is the shape of this seems to be a lot more uninteresting due to the fact that we have basically lowered the intensity of the displacement modifier that this guy had, knowing that lowering this did not at all affect the existence of these extra tendrils. I'm not really going to care about it. I'm going to increase it once again, and I'm just going to increase it to a value a bit higher than what we had before, just to make things look a bit more interesting. And another problem that I'm noticing is the inefficacy of this particular object over here. It's not really doing much, and well, essentially what it is doing is causing even more of these extrusions that I don't really want. Well, it doesn't really seem to be doing much, in fact, at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change quite a lot. So another thing that I feel like changing as well is the general behavior of these initial particles over here. It seems to me that there isn't really much movement in the smoke. A lot of it, partly because of the fact that these particles aren't really doing much. A lot of the movement occurs over here, which is exactly what I want. However, it's not sufficient, so either I'm going to have to increase the initial velocity, or I'm going to have to increase the normal velocity over here when it's at the maximum value. So I think I'm just going to increase the normal and leave the initial velocity as it is. So, you know what, let's just do that. I'm gonna unhide all of the objects just so I can disable this over here so that it doesn't, Blender doesn't have to calculate the behavior of the smoke while it's baking the particles. So let's just remove that. Let's go over here, and I'm gonna turn this, let's say, up to 7. Perhaps that might be sufficient. Yeah, okay, that looks quite interesting. Let's unhide everything else. Let's see, is there something else that I would need to do? So, oh yeah, of course, the other particle system that we had a few issues with, I'm going to change this one. Yeah, okay, I'm going to first of all increase the number of particles, let's say 5,000. Interesting, it doesn't seem like it's being affected by the other force field. The force field. Okay, there it is. It seems to be, oh. I want it to be influenced by it, yeah, okay, to a decent extent, so that it sort of forces part of the smoke simulation to move in that direction as well. So I think 0.4 might do. Let's see. Let's increase the initial velocity a little bit more, just so we can have a bit more movement. And let's see. I suppose I might actually be able to add a tiny bit of object velocity, so it actually, oh gosh, so it actually has some sort of expansion along with the expansion of this, this distorted icosphere as well. So I suppose that might do. Let's add a bit more random velocity, 0.8. Okay, yeah, maybe whatever. Yeah, I guess that might help. So yeah, let's retry this, and yeah, I'm gonna try to be fast here. Usually it takes a few days for me to finally get these basic things right, and I'm trying to get this right just in a few hours. So that's a complication. Oh, I'm gonna make this completely visible, of course. I have made a mistake. Well, not a mistake exactly, but I've forgotten something not exactly important, but something convenient that I shouldn't have forgotten about. So let's go over here, and I'm just gonna set this to bake, just so that it doesn't have to rebake that whenever we make a tiny change in the scene. And that's just a small little thing. So hopefully this will bake correctly now. Now we have a bit more of an interesting simulation, in my opinion. This does look like the smoke is really trying to move up, isn't it? So let me see how much these particles back over here are influencing the simulation. Not by much, actually, but I'm just gonna leave them there. Better than nothing, I suppose. And okay, so this part over here, the fire doesn't seem to be working very well. I think this can be this issue where everything seems to be a bit too turbulent over here. I'm going to try to reduce that problem in a few ways. So I have a small idea that might contribute significantly, but let's try that out. So I'm going to just increase the size of the texture over here. Nice. I'm not going to add any more depth. In fact, I'm going to remove some of that. Okay, so that's neat. Let's unhide all these other objects. Oh, this is a little big. I'm gonna move this up a bit more, just as that the upwards velocity is actually motivated by this object, and not exactly by not as much by the movement of the fire. So let's see if that actually has some sort of influence on the final result. I'm going to increase the flame rate over here to 1.5, just because I believe that adding a bit more movement on the fire might actually might improve the result and make sure that it doesn't get as crazy turbulent over here as it is right now. Though it does seem to be moving up quite violently, so I think I think it might be ideal for me to animate the flame rate as well. So I'm going to add a keyframe over here. It's 1.5. And let's go over here, turn it to, I guess, a 0. So I hope that that does something. So let's quickly try and see what exactly changed over here. Okay, so I do see a bit of an improvement, at least here in this initial stage. And well, later, however, it seems to fail by moving up way too quickly. So that over there is obviously a problem. I'm not entirely sure how I should go by fixing this, though. Perhaps, okay, so I'm gonna try a few things. So I'm gonna try and let's see. I'm gonna move these keyframes over here. Perhaps that might sort of force the fire to move across some of these other tendrils as well and sort of get distributed interestingly. I'm going to turn this down, however. I'm going to turn it to 1. Well, let's just go 1.2. Perhaps I might want to decrease it even further, so I'm just going to go over here and I'll just set this to 0.04. I suppose that might be enough changes for now. At least for that particular object. And I think I can try, let's see, of course it's not very visible anymore. Yeah, well, I'm going to just bake it again, see if it changed. Okay, so I'm going to try to find a different way of solving the problem of the particles not causing enough movement. So throughout this whole thing you can see initially these particles, these guys over here, they actually cause some pretty interesting effects, as you can see. However, soon enough, it gets a bit turbulent, and this guy, for example, just goes up into space because it doesn't really encounter much of a resistant force over here. So I think I'm going to have to do a few crazy measures. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I'm just going to hide this whole simulation, and I'm going to do a few changes to this guy. Move these back somewhere over there. And I'm going to change its scale. Reduce the strength of this modifier because it's way too strong now. Probably increase it a bit more over there. And let's see. Okay, and this is what I'm going to do for these particles. I'm going to have two different vert emitters over here. So I'm going to duplicate this guy. And make sure to just make these two visible. So this guy is going to be thinner, and it's going to induce less motion on the particles. So this is what I'm planning to do with it. Let's see. Well, it's less of what I'm planning to do with it and more of what I'm about to do with it, really. So let's set the velocity down over there. Let's set the random velocity down as well. So now the existent motion of the particles, you can see it's really nothing but just a thin streak over there. And well, I might actually want to increase the random velocity a bit more. Let's increase it. Let's actually turn the random velocity to 2. Let's go over here. And let's see. And let's perhaps 0 might not. Actually, I'm going to set that to 0, but I'm going to change the ramp over there, so it's going to take some time for it to... Okay. So there, that looks a little bit more interesting for that. And once again, these guys are not going to induce much movement. This guy, however, this guy's going to be faster. The animation of this guy will be a lot faster. Let's move this over there. Nice. There's the bake over there. Whoa. Oh, hold on. Yeah, of course. This is also going to be a bit smaller. And normal velocity is not going... None of these are going to down to 0. I'm going to set this one up to 3. Randomize. Set it up to 1. So hopefully this is going to have some nice movement going on over there. Oh, what's going on over here? Oh, of course, it doesn't end at frame 5. So let's set the ending over there. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. That's a little better. And let's see. Perhaps I might be able to increase the random velocity. Let's try 3.5. Yeah, I'm not sure if that has that much of an improvement now. Let's I'm just gonna set this back to frame 5 over there. So perhaps this will have some sort of effect. I'm not sure. I'm gonna try. Let's see. I'm gonna set this to 0.2. No, I'm gonna leave it at 0.17. So let's see if this makes some sort of change. We're making a lot of bigger changes over here. I'm starting to get a bit tired of the default shape of that. So I decided to do a few more massive changes on this to really make it look a bit more interesting than it is currently. Of course, I have to enable it over here. Okay, this might just be me. However, it seems like it took a bit longer to bake this whole thing, so let's see if a lot changed. Yes, I ruined the simulation. That's excellent. So, yeah, okay, so I might actually have to increase the random velocity on that other emitter, so let's do that. Let's see. Yeah, it goes absolutely insane. So, I ruined the simulation. That's excellent. Yeah, I'm gonna decrease the normal velocity on that other one. I'm gonna do that. I'm pretty sure that's what's causing that. Well, I've got everything else wrong so far, so perhaps it's not. Most likely it isn't. I'm going to decrease the... Oh, no, hold on. This one. I'm gonna decrease the normal velocity to, let's try 4. It's lower than the original. Hopefully, this is going to actually do something, and I'm going to increase the random velocity to 5. That's a significant increase. In fact, I'm going to just play the animation as it is right now, just so I don't need to bake the whole thing and verify only then, and only then realize that there was something wrong all the way in the start of the simulation. So that's why I'm doing this. Yeah, it's still. I'm gonna move this the end frame of the animation to frame 3. Perhaps we might actually solve some of these issues there. Okay, so I think it's starting to look a little better than before. That's cool. Finally, I got something right. Finally, one of my suspicions was actually correct. So it definitely seems to be that, though we still have some of these weird tendril-like things. These extrusions that we didn't really ask for coming out of the model, which is not exactly what we wanted, and it also has this very incredibly boring shape. So, in fact, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get rid of the fire. I don't really feel like it's appropriate in this context, so I'm just gonna get rid of it. That's a pretty substantial change, so I'm going to have to do a few things. I'm gonna increase the temperature difference over here to 0.07. I'm going to move over here and just turn it to smoke. Temperature difference at 1, perhaps I should just turn it to 4. Let's go over here. Hold on. And in fact, no, I'll just take a look at what I just changed right now. Never mind. I'm gonna have to bake some of these particle systems. So I want to make sure. Let's see this guy. I might have to bake this one as well. It's already baked. So of course I exaggerated the upwards velocity of this whole thing, though this actually seems pretty interesting. At this point, for example, I like the way it looks. Well, perhaps over here. So I'm just gonna have to slow this whole thing down a bit. I do enjoy some of the aesthetic going on down here, so the movement is getting pretty decent. I'm going to do something that I should have done all the way from the beginning and lower the vorticity down to 2. It seems to be pointlessly high right now. I'm going to go over here to this emitter over here, this vert emitter, and I'm going to force some more random velocity on this guy. Let's see, probably 6. Let's add a keyframe there. Well, this is something that I shouldn't have done. That's pointlessly slow, of course. I apologize for my absolute absence of intellect. Let's go back over here, and now it can be baked. I think I might actually lower the normal velocity on it. No, hold on, I'm not gonna do that exactly? Is it the reasonable choice? No, actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lower this one to 0.13, I guess. So that's gonna get lower. This one is going to... I'm gonna set the... Why is the density so... Okay, so the density over there is varying. I'm gonna get rid of the keyframes over here and just set the density of this guy to 0.5. So 0.5 and this other one. Clear the keyframes. Leave that at 1. Let's see if... oh, of course, I needed to reduce this. I'm going to reduce it back to 0.04. Perhaps 0.04 might be a little... 0.05, and go to this other emitter over here. Go to this this emitter over here, and reduce the temperature difference to... I guess I should just go with probably 1.3. I've said it a million times before, but I just like how it looks like in the beginning, and it just seems to ruin it towards the end. Though there are still some problems here at the start as well, like just the fact that it's a huge bubble going on over here. You know what? I'm gonna do something that I feel like might get rid of all of my problems. I'm just gonna delete this object. No, I'm gonna move it to a new collection. So let's just move this guy over here and press E to exclude it from everything else, just so that it's not going to influence this at all. So hopefully that's going to do something to fix the problem. I'm just thinking what exactly I should do to replace that with, because we're gonna need some movement. But that might not be the most appropriate way of adding it, so that's why I got rid of it. Perhaps I might use some particles as well to create that movement. Perhaps that might be the most intelligent choice in this particular case. I think adding a mesh can be a bit too sharp especially on the edges of that mesh, which is a problem. However, when we do it with particles, things are a bit... it usually has a more fuzzy edge around the emitter, so I think that works a lot better for this particular case. So yeah, as you can see, so hold on. When you have particles, the edges tend to be a lot more rough. Oh, this is cool. Look at that movement. But of course, when we get to the late portion of the animation, things get a little strange and weird and just undesirable in general. So I'm going to have to do a few changes. I suspect that the temperature of this emitter might be responsible for some of this strange movement that's going on. So I'm going to just make that visible again. Let's see. I'm going to turn the temperature difference of both of these guys to 0. So apparently we're at the start again. Well, not exactly at the start. A few changes have been made, but at least I know what exactly not to do and what I should probably do. So that difference is existent currently. Now, I'm not entirely sure how exactly the second emitter would have to go. Of course, I suspect it should be through particles, but the movement itself might be a bit more difficult to get. So perhaps I'll try fire. In fact, I won't try it again. It didn't work the first time. I'm probably not going to do it the second time. This simulation doesn't seem to be very accepting of fire, so... Okay, so this seems to be... Yeah, it seems to move very interestingly, but I'm going to have to increase the strength of this guy a bit more. Or decrease it, sorry. -20 perhaps might work. And I should animate it just so that it will stop working towards the end, because we don't really need it then. Just change that a bit like that. Just so that it will have still some pretty significant strength across the animation over here. So, what should I do now? I think... You know, I think I should probably add another emitter already. Or I should bring this guy back but change it a bit. So I'm going to duplicate it, in fact. And move it to the current collection that we are in. Oops, so hold on. This guy. So it's not going to be at the force fields. It's going to be here. So this guy's going to be a bit different. So firstly, we're going to move the animation way over here. So it basically influences the whole simulation already. And I guess I ditched the whole idea of having particles do it. Because a mesh is pretty smooth, and I guess we need some of that right now. There's this strange part that's happening right over here. where it's expanding across this particular area, which I find a bit strange. I think, hold on, I think it might have something to do with this emitter. So I'm going to also move this guy to the unused collection. Perhaps we might find it pretty useful later on. I don't know, but I'm going to keep that excluded for now. It's funny, usually I have to animate the vorticity from 4 to a lower number across the animation. Here it seems like I'm going to have to do the opposite, animate it from 2 to something higher. So, because it seems to be pretty awfully smooth over here, so it might be a bit more convenient to do that sort of change. And let's just move that down a bit. Whatever, I'm going to try the way it is. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and I'm going to have to change it. But, in fact, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to speed through the whole changing process, because I want to get as quick as possible to adding the force fields and increasing the resolution. That is going to be my focus for now. So, if I encounter a bit of a problem here that would require some sort of tweaking of the current settings, I'm going to speed through that, and I'm going to come back when it's finally time to increase the resolution and add some force fields. So, I'll see you then. Okay, I can't say I'm exactly a fan of what this looks right now, but it has some interesting characteristics that I think might actually be pretty beneficial later on. So I think I might cut this animation short at frame 60, because over here things start to... the movement is pretty much exclusively vertical, and there's nothing really interesting going on here. So I think the animation itself would end at frame 60, so this would be about 2 seconds long. And that's, I think it's time. It's time for us to increase the resolution, add some force fields as well, and see how exactly the end result would be. Well, not exactly the end result. We still need to... actually, no, hold on. I first need to make sure that this looks correct when the high resolution is enabled. So, is this... oh, okay, I completely destroyed all this, the whole bake. I'm going to have to bake this again. So what I'm going to do, after this is done baking, I'm going to render this footage out through the GLSL renderer, and then I'm going to, after that, I'm going to enable the high resolution and re-render this scene, because I want to know how exactly this, the wavelet noise is going to influence the simulation, because if it gets rid of some of the essential details that are present already in it, then that's really bad news for the future, because we're going to add some turbulence force fields in order to add some extra detail to it. And if the detail that is already there without those turbulence force fields is going to be reduced by the high resolution that we're going to enable later on, it's going to be a bit tricky to recover from that. So it's there are ways to solve that issue, but they involve essentially changing the very basics of how the simulation looks right now. So that's why I'm going to do this verification procedure as soon as possible. So okay, let's just isolate this object. Do that. Set the directory over here. Skadoosh. Alright. To be honest, the animation turned out to be a little better than I actually thought initially. So yeah, I really do need to end it at frame 60, but other than that, it actually looks pretty good. Though there is one tiny issue that is going to become a problem when we increase the resolution, and it's the fact that the power over here is way too low. I increase it to 2.3 over there, so that's hopefully going to reduce some of the effect that this guy has on these the rest of the simulation, because the whole simulation seems to be shrinking just ever so slightly towards this force field. So maybe I should increase it a bit more. So that's the reason why I'm doing that. Probably move that over there. Nice. So right now, what I'm gonna do, of course, is just test this out with the high resolution here enabled. I usually set the strength by default to about 3, just because I think 2 is a bit too weak to account for some of the larger plumes that this smoke has, so 3 just seems pretty good. And anyway, I'm just going to bake it right now. This is going to take a while. It's going to take about 8 times longer than it would without it, so I'm going to leave for a second right now. I'm going to come back in just a few minutes. This looks fantastic. I don't want to change anything about it. Let's move on. Let's not add the force fields. No, I'm going to add them, but I'm going to make them just weak enough to have some sort of effect on the simulation. This looks fantastic. I didn't realize this guy would, high resolution would really improve it, and never mind, it works properly. So ignore everything that I just did, recording that whole footage and setting this whole thing up, because it looks good, it looks fantastic. Let's move on. Let's just increase the resolution, see what changes, and then I'm gonna add the force field. So I'm gonna go with 128 over here. I might just add the force fields right now, because it's a very standard thing for me to do, the turbulence force fields. I usually add 3 turbulence force fields, so let's I'm going to show you how exactly I do that thing. It's a procedure that's pretty standard for me. So the method is basically just to create 1 turbulence force field. That's pretty big. I'm going to actually increase the size of this guy to 2, just so that this guy will have a very general effect on the motion of the smoke over there. And I'm going to set the strength to a decently high value over here, 5, because actually I'm going to move this to force field stasher 1. This is the one that's being used by the smoke simulation, isn't it? Oh, never mind. It's the one that's being used by everything that has it enabled in the field weight. So whatever. So the point of increasing the size of it is to add some of this general motion to the smoke, and the strength is pretty high because, once again, smoke is quite difficult to influence through force fields. So you're gonna have to increase the strength quite a bit to have some sort of sufficient influence on it. I'm going to duplicate it. Actually, before I duplicate it, I'm going to add a location keyframe and animate it. The reason why I'm going to animate it is just so that there will be some sort of variation with the turbulence, so that it doesn't look like the turbulence itself, that the movement itself doesn't change over time. I want to create some sort of variation. So I'm going to go over here, add a generator modifier, set this to 0.1. So I'm going to set that to 0.1. I'm going to duplicate this guy. You know, and I'm going to set the size over here to 0, which is for the turbulence force field, the same thing as 1. And I'm going to slow this one down because the smaller the turbulence over here... Oh, sorry, set this 0.05. Usually the parts that are moving faster get a lot more easily influenced by larger turbulence than smaller, than some more high-frequency turbulence. So that's why I'm just slowing it down, just so that it spends a bit more time affecting this one particular area. And I'm also going to increase the strength, let's say to probably 6. I don't want to increase it too much. The one that I do want to increase too much, however, however, is this next one. I'm going to set the size to 0.5, and I'm going to increase the strength to, let's say, perhaps 9. Not that much of a difference, but still something that is to be noted. I'm going to set that to 0.02, and so now we have these 3 turbulence force fields that are going to have a nice influence on the nature of the simulation. Now I'm going to move them first to an excluded collection, because because I want to know what exactly the influence of the increase in the resolution that we did on the domain is going to have. So unused force fields. exclude that. So I'm just gonna go over here on the domain and bake it the way it is before we can actually see any sort of difference that the force fields are producing on the simulation. So let's do that. So it doesn't seem to, the increase in resolution only seemed to have made things a bit smoother. It so far doesn't seem like it had much of an influence on the general shape of the simulation, which is good news. Of course, there's a bit of a problem over here, with the whole thing being sort of cut off of it at this area, but that's no big deal. I'm just going to add some extra resolution over here on the adaptive domain to sort of expand the domain a bit more without needing to scale it up and then readapt the base divisions to sort of compensate for that scale that we did. So yeah, I think it's ready for me to record this. So I'm just going to go over here and render the viewport animation in a new directory as well, so we can compare everything. There's this a bit of an annoying thing over here in the beginning where everything is a bit noisy, but I'm not paying much attention to that. Not many people pay attention to the beginning, the very, very first frames of that explosion, but it might be convenient to change that, though I'm not doing much work on that. While it's rendering, I'm seeing the fact that this is quite smooth. For example, this huge plume, it's splitting up, which is good. However, it still is pretty smooth. I would rather add some smaller details on it, which is good news for our force fields, our turbulence force fields. This whole thing seems to be quite promising for the turbulence force fields. This other plume as well. This one is just perfectly smooth. Hasn't really split up yet. This is actually surprisingly good. I haven't encountered a situation in which a simulation looked this exactly, this close to its low resolution counterpart. So now I'm just going to enable these turbulence force fields. I'm going to move them to the force fields collection that we have over here. I'm going to delete this collection that we added, and let's see how exactly these influence the simulation, and see if we really need to make many changes there. I'm suspecting that I'm going to have to lower the intensity of each of those force fields later on, but I am keeping it like this just because I don't know their exact influence on the simulation anyway, so I'm reserving my judgment until I actually have a result. Well, yeah, as I suspected, I need to lower the intensity of some of these force fields. So actually, I want to increase this guy's strength, because this guy doesn't seem to be doing much work. This guy, yeah, it's doing okay. Let me decrease it to 5, and this boy, I'm gonna decrease it to 6. Hopefully, this is going to have a bit of a change on that. Yeah, the simulation is going a bit insane. I might... No. Should I increase the flow? I'm gonna increase the flow to 0.2. Don't want to have too much of an effect there. Now, before I do much, I'm going to actually increase the... I'm gonna add a bit more resolution over there. Add some 6 extra divisions outside of the domain. So that's in order to expand the domain to account for some of the smoke that's moving outside, that's colliding with the walls of it. So I did that. I'm gonna have to move the domain back up over here, just to make sure that the smoke won't go beneath the collision floor that I added. Well, that might do the trick. Let's see if let's just bake it and see how exactly things change. This is a pretty annoying process. You do a small change and you bake it again, and it might be a bit pesky, but it's kind of fun, especially if you have a bunch of reference footage. So the instant you press bake, you can just alt-tab into your reference videos and see if your smoke simulation is actually consistent with some real explosions. So that's you can find some charm in it, but it's initially at least a pretty frustrating experience having to bake it constantly. Okay, so it looks like it has improved. but it still feels a bit strong, especially over here. You can see things are getting a bit chaotic over there. The vorticity is at 2. I'm not going to decrease it any further, so I think I'm gonna have to change some of these settings over here. I'm gonna completely get rid of the change that we had on the flow. I'm gonna set this down to 3, which is quite a small number. So I'm gonna have to pay attention to the results over there. This guy's at 5. I'm gonna set this to 4. And perhaps set this as well pretty low. I think this guy might also be responsible for a bit of the change going on there. So I'm going to set it to 5. And then I'm going to bake it. So the bake is done. And it seems like for the most part those problems have been accounted for. However, I'm now discovering why exactly these areas collided with the walls of the domain. And it's because they don't seem to know when exactly to stop. This guy, for example, is just having this horizontal movement. It's slowing down, but not by enough. And this plume over here is just stretching upwards, and it's not exactly producing the most interesting results. So this video is already incredibly long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed up through that whole procedure and narrate it separately, so you guys are finally going to be able to see something that isn't insufferably boring like this.
I spent most of the time experimenting with different configurations of settings and animations, trying to find the best results I could from the available emitters, domain, and force fields. It's quite challenging to narrate that, so I'll just focus on the main things. To prevent the continuous horizontal and vertical stretching I observed, I added a couple of wind force fields as a means of decelerating the plumes which were moving too far. That's a lot harder than it seems because a lot of factors need to be taken into consideration, such as the intensity, the fall-off, and the position of the keyframes that animate the strength. I didn't like the look of the lower portion of the simulation, so I further separated the emitter into the rapidly moving trails and the shockwave, so to speak. After I found an appealing shape for the explosion, I created a really basic scene by projecting an image onto a harshly curved object. It was mostly emitting light to serve as a bounce light for the explosion, however, the areas near the domain were transitioned into a diffuse shader. This helped me insert the simulation into a convincing scene and add some realistic colors in the smoke shader. Finally, I would like to take a moment to talk about shaders. Blender's smoke simulator is far from accurate, so if you want to produce at least somewhat convincing looking smoke and fire, you need to make the shader look as realistic as possible to compensate for the flaws of the simulation. Now I know that dense, almost pyroclastic smoke is a pretty attractive idea as it makes your simulation look colossal, but in reality, smoke and dust tend to be quite translucent. Also, there are explosions in which both smoke and dust rise, which can lead to some color variation. Thankfully, we've got that covered, but I only have black and white colors. This is so that I can use a color ramp in the shaders instead of having to manually tweak the colors of each emitter. Because of the greater control needed here, I prefer to use the traditional node tree instead of the principled volume shader. Changing the contrast of the density affects how sharp the smoke looks, so I figured that making some parts sharp while maintaining others fuzzy could add to the realism, which I think it did a pretty good job at that. And finally, I decided to have a portion of the explosion emit light, at least at the beginning. Since there are no flames, I had to use the heat factor of the smoke as an emitter. These are essentially the most important things that happened. Of course, a lot more was done with the shaders, and I eventually decided to create a dust particle system and even another version of the explosion with a lot of modified settings, but I believe going over them would be superfluous for such a long video. Well, this video took surprisingly long to create and edit, so I apologize for that. But I finally managed to do it before college and depression got to me again, which is great. Thank you for watching if you managed to do so, and a special thank you to all you patrons supporting my channel. Thank you all. Have a nice day.